Hello, welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Cater. Tonight we take a closer look at the implications of the resignation of yet another French Prime Minister, a sign of the deepening political instability in one of the EU's most important member states. Sébastien Lecornu has resigned as France's Prime Minister after just 26 days, and I'm joined by Emmanuel Dupuy, President of the Institute of European Perspectives and Security Studies. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, it's a pleasure.
So, I want to begin with asking your opinion about what were the central forces that made Lecornu's position so fragile to begin with, because I believe that probably played an important role and contributed to his resignation.
Well, first of all, his resignation was absolutely obvious, since he did not have a clear-cut majority, and this has been the case with the former three other prime ministers who have been incapable of presenting a sufficient numbers of voters and numbers of MPs, and Lecornu did not make it quite clearer on his 26 days of nomination and the 14 hours and 26 seconds of his government, since there was an announcement of a government which didn't even start working. So I think Sébastien Lecornu, not differently than François Bayrou that is on your screen, and his predecessor Michel Barnier, and even Gabriel Attal, have had the capacity to take in consideration the milestone of the problem that we are facing, the dissolution of the National Assembly in June 2024, which has showcased the fact that the France political spectrum is ungovernable, since it is made of three blocks which cannot cope one with each other, but which neither has the majority to win the election. So the architecture is very simple. If the Prime Minister does not have a majority, if the Prime Minister doesn't even have a clear sustain from his fragile political forces, how can he propose a budget? How can he propose the reforms that the Prime Minister, François Bayrou, were not capable of proposing? So we are in a major crisis, and the only way to get out of this crisis is to have new elections.
So you agree with Lecornu saying that he struggled with the parliamentary dynamics that got in the way of him fulfilling his job brief. So I wanted to ask, you would agree that this resignation
No, not precisely. This is not precisely what I'm saying. Sébastien Lecornu did not open to a certain number of political forces, regardless of what he proposed to do. And this is the major axis of the crisis. If he would have had open to other political forces, he may not be in the situation in which he is. The resignation was obvious amongst the ministers of his majority, not of the political forces outside his majority.
And would you say that this resignation is a symptom of much deeper institutional dysfunction, also versus a poor political strategy or miscalculation even?
It's both. It's a poor miscalculation of the president, and the responsibility is of the president of the Republic, who decided to dissolve the National Assembly, creating ungovernability and unpredictability of the political forces, of the adoption of the political forces. You have extreme left and extreme right, which will never be in capacity to govern together, but can both, if they are associated, make any prime minister resign or censor the government, which, by the way, was the case for two previous prime ministers during the last 8 months. And of course, the central bloc is incapacity to make compromise. But the problem comes from the fact that even inside the majority bloc, the centrist bloc, President Macron's party, the 20 forces and the Republican, they were not agreeing on the strategy to fulfill. And that is why Sébastien Lecornu did not manage even to have his government present and to start working, and for him to present his political reforms.
So judging by the polls, what do you think President Emmanuel Macron's next step will be, or perhaps should be?
Well, considering the polls, Emmanuel Macron has absolutely no way of winning in any case, since his political forces have collapsed. The only logical, pragmatic aspiration that Emmanuel Macron should have would go back to the voting process. But of course, as your polls are mentioning and the current trends are showing, that would mean that the democratic system puts the extreme right way, way before any other political party, giving the impression that the president may not have any more choices but to give the prime minister's office to the representative of the national rally.
How likely do you think that we are looking at some cohabitation of sorts?
We are already been in cohabitation for the last 2 years. The president's party has lost the election 2 years ago. Is the government who have governed are not the majority presidential party, but it gave the impression for the public opinion that that was the case, but it is no longer the case since the Republicans and a certain number of centrist parties who were in opposition accepted to be part of the government. Most likely, the cohabitation will be harder, but it has already been a reality during the last 2 years.
Okay, now I want to bring in a comment from Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and I'd love to hear your comments on that.
To respond to this situation, we must go to the heart of the problem, which means returning to the people and calling into question the legitimacy of the French president in the ways that our parliamentary democracy allows. I repeat, within the institutional framework we have. What are these ways? There is one: the impeachment of the president, as provided for in the Constitution itself. This impeachment is desirable and therefore must be possible.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, on an institutional basis, Jean-Luc Mélenchon is right. The Constitution allows the destitution of the president and forcing him to resign. But that would mean that 2/3 of the MPs, both the 377 senators, the 348 senators, the 577 MPs gathered together in Versailles by 2/3 of this majority bloc accept to vote to destitute the president. Most likely, this is impossible, mathematically, arithmetically speaking. So the question of the destitution is not, it's institutional possible, but it's infeasible. What is possible is more pressure from both extreme right and extreme left. And I have to say, since yesterday night, the Republican Party and the Socialist Party to force the president to dissolve again the National Assembly. He has the possibility to do so. As you know, in our Constitution, you cannot dissolve regardless of 1 year period. The last dissolvement was 1 year and 3 months ago. So now the president can decide to ask the French to vote again. But what would be the results? The extreme right will have 40% of the seats. Extreme left will have something like around 25%, and the majority bloc, therefore the political forces sustaining the president, will be ultra minority. So the president will be obliged to rule with political parties who will not follow his policies.
Mm-hmm. Aside from the comments that you made about the arithmetics of the votes amongst the MPs, do you think that President Macron should step down?
Well, I think it is most logical and the most reasonable situation. The problem comes from the president. There is a core opposition amongst all of the MPs of the responsibility of the president not to be capable of nominating a prime minister in capacity to fulfill the policies that he has proposed. Therefore, we have to go in the roots of the problem and ask whether we go to a dissolvement of the National Assembly, which is very plausible, and it will happen, I think, by the end of the week, will be decided by the end of the week. But the other reason, which will maybe put an end to the crisis, would be to accelerate the presidential vote. Macron cannot run again, and therefore the French will decide whether or not they want to pursue the policies made by Emmanuel Macron proposed by Emmanuel Macron since 2017, or they want to change radically the political choices they have in front of them.
Okay, it's been a fascinating conversation. Emmanuel Dupuy, President of the Institute for European Perspective and Security Studies, thank you so much for joining us today.
It was a pleasure.
And that wraps up this edition of World Talks. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for more exclusive interviews on TVP World. Goodbye.